Welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and yesterday, February 19th, 2025, was supposed to be a critical moment in the cases against David Lee Hamblin, a disgraced therapist accused of multiple counts of child sex abuse. Instead, it turned into a disaster for the prosecution and, you know what, just a devastating blow to the survivors. Why is it so hard for investigators and prosecutors to legally prove that David Lee Hamblin allegedly sexually abused children? Why? How many survivors over the last 2 decades have to come forward? We know of 3 on the record. Hamblin's own daughter in 2012, the American Fork survivor, ES, and the Manti San Pete survivor, TS. Oh, and there's also a man named Brett Bluth who has spoken out publicly about his alleged abuse at the hands of Hamblin, who was his therapist when he was a child. And Bluth, he told his story. He told his devastating truth to Congress when the ritualistic abuse bill was being considered, and more on that later. And I'm going to speculate here. There have been many more survivors that have come forward. My opinion, again, based on unverified reports that I have read. And to be clear, I've said it once and I'll say it again. I believe all of the survivors' testimonies that I have read. But since these people, they know who they are, and they most likely listen to any and all coverage about Hamblin and the ritualistic abuse scandal, these people are litigious. So I'm watching myself. I'm watching what I say here, but I believe all of the survivors. And apparently for Utah County, 4 people officially on the record for decades, 3 investigations, or I guess, according to Sheriff Mike's speech at the private event last week, an active, ongoing investigation now, and nothing. David Lee Hamblin gets to go home, condition his disgusting hair, and live his disgusting life. And let's not forget, in 1999, Hamblin lost his license as a therapist for having sex with his patients. This is verified and documented, and you can refer to the episode notes here. Quote, Dr. Hamblin's license to practice was revoked for having intimate relations with several patients during clinical therapeutic sessions and claiming that it was therapeutic, end quote, said Lori Arnsemes, operational manager for the Utah Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing. So why is it so hard to believe that he did this to children? He did this to children as well, allegedly. Why is this so hard to believe? Okay, enough of my stream of consciousness. I apologize. That was a little emotional, but let's get to the theatrical circus of the not one, but yes, 2 hearings that occurred yesterday, because I speculated that maybe there was a scheduling issue and one would be canceled. Yeah, that wasn't the case at all. So there was one hearing in person in Manti San Pete with survivor TS, and the other was on Zoom, the American Fork case with survivor ES. And a wonderful couple that I have gotten to know just a bit, Jason and Alexia Preston, were in attendance in San Pete, and they have a great platform, and I will link it out in the episode notes. You guys have to follow them. But they shared with me that in court, Hamblin appeared to be so freaking relaxed at times that at one point he was sleeping. I mean, how repulsive and how thoughtless. Just to not have a care in the world. Can you imagine you just fall asleep in court in front of your, oh my gosh, yeah, I'll stop. But yes, he walked in dressed in a black suit for the San Pete pretrial hearing, but then was excused about 30, 40 minutes later to head into what I'm assuming was a private room for his Zoom hearing in the American Fork case. And as a side note, why would they schedule these on the same day? I feel like this seems to be a nice strategy for the defense. I feel like they all talk and that's fine. But I think they knew what was going to happen in the E.S. American Fork case, and what happened would surely help Hamblin in his San Pete case, and you'll see why. So first, in American Fork, Judge Roger Griffin, who also deemed that Hamblin should be released on house arrest and bail and could go about living his life in 2023, ended up dismissing the case against Hamblin regarding his alleged abuse of ES. Why? Because investigators from the Utah County Sheriff's Office withheld crucial evidence for more than 2 years, despite multiple court orders to turn it over. This is specifically investigators Elise Hines and Jason Randall. They withheld key evidence for over 2 years here. I mean, what? In my opinion, there has to be an explanation for this, or else it seems to be deliberate, and I don't want to believe that because it destroyed the prosecution's case. Now on September 28th, 2022, the case against Hamblin was officially filed. He was officially charged based on allegations by ES that focused only on non-ritualistic abuse, just plain disgusting child sex abuse. However, one day later, on September 29th, apparently Utah County investigators conducted an additional interview with ES, and this is the one they conveniently failed to disclose to the defense until nearly 2 years later. So in this suppressed interview on September 29th, ES detailed horrific allegations of abuse, but it was ritual abuse. So she described a particular disturbing incident, and this was not part of the original charges filed against Hamblin. It was an entirely separate piece of evidence that the prosecution seemingly wanted to bury, or the Utah County Sheriff's Office, and this was likely to avoid dealing with the politically explosive issue of ritual abuse. And this need to avoid the ritual abuse, well, I don't think I mentioned it on a podcast yet because I just covered this on the last episode and I was confused about House Bill 196, but I found out that House Bill 196 that would criminalize and define ritualistic abuse, it's dead. It was somehow killed in the Senate. And it is not publicized anywhere that it was killed. I mean, it's insane. And I don't have any other details regarding that right now. But wow, why is Utah so seemingly obsessed with protecting alleged ritualistic child abusers and plain old nasty child abusers? It's like they know this law will never pass or the bill will never pass, but they want to make the survivors feel like they are being heard and they're not being ignored. So they hold vigils, they let them speak, all the while knowing nothing will ever happen. And of course, that's my opinion, but it sure seems like that's the case here. But back to certain evidence being withheld. In a December 2022 filing, the initial prosecutor, Ryan Peters, wrote a motion that read this, quote, "The defendant is charged in this matter with sexually abusing the alleged victim, not in the context of a satanic child abuse cult, but in his own homes with perhaps only family members present. Currently, there are no charges that the defendant abused the alleged victim in this case in the context of a cult. The state, however, acknowledges that others have suggested and accused the defendant and many others of participating in a satanic child abuse cult." End quote. So Hamblin's defense was like, okay, so did the prosecutor, the former prosecutor, Ryan Peters, willfully cover up the evidence that he had, or was he in the dark like us? Seemingly, he had this evidence. He had that interview, or else why would he specifically put that in a filing? Like, oh, no, this has nothing to do with ritualistic abuse. I want to make that clear. Just kind of skimming over it because he possibly knew that would make his case more difficult. And again, this is me speculating. Do not take this as fact. That is my opinion, but that is what he wrote on a motion. Now, when Hamblin's defense attorneys finally got their hands on this hidden evidence, this ES extra interview from 2022, and also new evidence that had her own parents saying, oh, ES makes things up. She can be ridiculous. Okay, by the way, her parents were named in the 2012 victim impact statement, but yeah, after years of fighting for discovery, they argued now with this information, the entire case was tainted due to the fact that, once again, it appears that either prosecutors or the investigators at Utah County were hiding this information. And if you recall on the last episode I did, I noted that Special Prosecutor Evershed did turn this discovery over finally on February 5th, 2025. And if you recall, I made a comment like, why did it take so long for the other prosecutors to do this? What the hell happened? But because the interview and evidence had failed to be turned over when it was supposed to be, Evershed recognized this legal mess and apparently had no choice but to file a motion to dismiss the entire case. The decision now rests with the judge, Judge Roger Griffin, whether or not it will be dismissed with or without prejudice, meaning prosecutors will get another shot to prosecute Hamblin if it's dismissed without prejudice, but if it's dismissed with prejudice, he will walk free from these charges for good. And Evershed did file a motion for this case to be dismissed without prejudice, as he should have. But look, we have a bigger problem on our hands here with the Utah County Sheriff's Office and the conduct of these investigators. And I don't pretend to know everything. Was there a reason for them withholding this information? Did something go down behind the scenes? Was there an issue? I mean, I would love to know, but I am not a fly on the wall there, unfortunately. So, meanwhile, over in Manti, San Pete, the preliminary hearing for the other survivor, TS, was delayed and a continuance was granted. And shocker, it's over the missing evidence from the same problematic Utah County Sheriff's Office investigators in the American Fork case. The whole problem of them not disclosing that information and those interviews may have screwed everything up for both cases. However, there has been no mention of any ritualistic abuse from the San Pete survivor, TS, just plain old nasty pedo stuff. So perhaps that will help the case. But let me read from the defense sanction filing about this issue. Quote, defense counsel cannot imagine a reason for there to be multiple versions of a police report. There are addendums to police reports, not multiple versions. During the evidentiary hearing held in the Manti case, it was confirmed that there was not a second investigation unit conducting the investigation. In the American Fork case, the defendant has filed a motion for sanctions against the Utah County investigators who investigated both cases. End quote. So now the defense has to wait on getting all of the discovery from the other case, from the American Fork case. And so Judge Mandy Larson pushed the hearing back at least another month, despite a plea from TS on the stand. So this gave Hamblin's defense exactly what they needed, an excuse to stall. So I'm a little confused here, guys. This is not about a lack of evidence anymore. This is about misconduct and law enforcement and prosecutors potentially failing to do their jobs. And this is a big deal. I spoke to a colleague who was a homicide prosecutor for 2 decades, and he's like, yeah, if law enforcement messed up not just 1, but 2 of my cases involving alleged abuse survivors, yeah, there would be some jobs on the line. And these investigators, they're not dumb. The Utah County Sheriff's Office, I mean, it's not small. They are well trained. This is not some tiny little town, an East Bum, whatever. I mean, this is just, it's disgraceful. So that's why I want to give them the benefit of the doubt to say, okay, this is what happened. There was an issue. There was a miscommunication, anything here. I don't want to believe that it was something nefarious. But now you have survivor ES left wondering if her alleged abuser will ever face a jury trial and pay for what he did. And now you have TS stuck in legal limbo, as if this hasn't gone on long enough. And I am just sick for them and for anyone else that this directly affects. But it's not over until it's over. And going back to the House bills, Utah House Bill 196, criminalizing and defining ritualistic sex abuse. Yes, it was killed by the Senate, and I mentioned that I'm confused. I don't know how that happened, but I also mentioned on the last episode that House Bill 66, which addresses ritual abuse, is simply waiting on a signature from the governor, meaning it will most likely become a law. That bill is described as follows. Requires current sexual assault and sexual abuse training for law enforcement officers to include training on sexual assault committed during a ritual and the impact of that conduct on the victim. Creates an aggravating factor for certain offenses committed against an individual under 18 years old if the offense was committed as part of a ritual. Contains a coordination clause to coordinate a substantive change between this bill and SB 24 Child Abuse and Torture Amendments by adding the crime of child torture, which is newly created in SB 24, to the list of offenses that qualify for the aggravating factor created in this bill, and makes technical and conforming changes. End quote. So, Utah won't criminalize ritualistic abuse, but they'll train law enforcement on the impact of the abuse on the survivors and how to identify ritualistic abuse. I mean, what? Make that make sense. And the last thing I want to go over today, and I know that I've been a little bit emotional and angry, but I'm incredibly frustrated. I can't lie to you all, but I had a forensic psychologist that was booked because I wanted to talk about the disassociation, and I think I sent them a bunch of documents, and I sent them the PACE memo, and they were all on board, and then last minute they were like, actually, I might not be the best person for this, so they canceled on me, and it hit me. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to address what is going on. And I understand. It's hard. It's almost unbelievable. I've said this before, but it's real. And I believe all of the survivors. I don't know how many times I can say this, but I did book another forensic psych for next week, and I was upfront with them. I said, look, if you're uncomfortable discussing any of this, tell me now, tell me upfront. And they said, nope, I'm ready to discuss it. So hopefully by next week, we will all be better educated on that topic. And I have been doing some of my own research, and I am going to read something to you from the American Psychological Association, which I will also include in the episode notes. And this is very general, but this page it's actually been archived, believe it or not, because it's no longer being updated regularly. Shocker. But the title is Memories of Childhood Abuse. And they have a little Q&A section, and I'm just going to read to you the first question and answer. Question: can a memory be forgotten and then remembered? Can a, quote, memory be suggested and then remembered as true? The answer: experts in the field of memory and trauma can provide some answers, but clearly more study and research are needed. What we do know is that both memory researchers and clinicians who work with trauma victims agree that both phenomena occur. However, experienced clinical psychologists state that the phenomenon of a recovered memory is rare, although lab studies have shown that memory can be inaccurate and can also be influenced by outside factors, but memory research usually takes place in a lab or some type of everyday settings. But for ethical and humanitarian reasons, memory researchers don't subject people to a traumatic event in order to test their memory of it, so it's a bit unclear. Because the issue has not been directly studied, we can't know whether a memory of a traumatic event is encoded and stored differently from a memory of a non-traumatic event. Some clinicians theorize that children understand and respond to trauma differently from adults. Some furthermore believe that childhood trauma may lead to problems in memory storage and retrieval. These clinicians believe that disassociation is likely an explanation for a memory that was forgotten and later recalled. Disassociation means that a memory is not actually lost, but is for some time unavailable for retrieval. That is, it's in memory storage, but cannot for some period of time actually be recalled. Some clinicians believe that severe forms of child SA are especially conducive to negative disturbances of memory, such as disassociation or delayed memory. Many clinicians who work with trauma victims believe that this disassociation is a person's way of sheltering himself or herself from the pain of the memory. Many researchers argue, however, that there is little to no support for such a theory. So what's the bottom line here? The mechanisms by which both of these phenomena happen are not well understood, and at this point, it seems impossible without other corroborative evidence to distinguish a true memory from a false one. End quote. Let me remind you, this was written and studied in 1995 and has not been updated since. But I think it's interesting to see how they refused to do more research, or I shouldn't say refused, but they didn't want to do more research because they didn't want to cause harm to an individual who had these traumatic memories. I understand that, but surely somebody has come forward since then and said, no, please use me. I want to do this in order to help others. I will do my research on that before next week. Okay, guys, I hope this episode was informative and I hope I wasn't too emotional, but I appreciate all of you listening. And I would love for this coverage of David Lee Hamblin and his alleged crimes to be national. I mean, at this point, not one local news station was in attendance at his hearing yesterday. And I found that to be so sad. Oh my goodness, so sad. People are scared, and that's pretty obvious. But if we can get this to a national level, if we can get some national attention and eyes on this, I think that will be wonderful. And I think that if there isn't one going on right now, a federal investigation is necessary into this man, into his alleged crimes. And please, world, just show me that the Mormon Church is not more powerful than the DOJ. Please, just show me that. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Stay safe, stay vigilant. I'm Lauren Conlin.